Welcome to Mr. Horror, where we bring you 3 terrifying true Craigslist horror stories. From dangerous roommates to shady job offers and criminal organizations, these stories will make you think twice before trusting strangers online. Get ready to be scared out of your wits as we delve into the darkest corners of the internet. I had been searching for a job for months, and I was getting desperate. I had bills piling up and no income coming in, so when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a marketing position, I jumped at the opportunity. The ad seemed legitimate, with a company name and contact information listed. I sent in my resume, and a few days later, I received an email asking me to come in for an interview. I was excited, but also nervous. I had never heard of the company before, and I didn't know anything about the person who was interviewing me. When I arrived at the address that was listed in the email, I was surprised to find that it was a rundown office building in a seedy part of town. But I didn't let that deter me. I was determined to land this job, no matter what. I walked into the building and was met by a woman who introduced herself as the interviewer. She seemed friendly enough, but there was something off about her. She was overly eager, and her smile seemed forced. But I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the interview. It seemed to be going well, and I was hopeful that I might finally have found a job. That's when things took a dark turn. The woman suddenly stopped asking me questions about my experience and started asking me personal questions. She wanted to know about my relationship status, my family, and even my political beliefs. I was taken aback, but I tried to answer her questions as honestly as I could. But as the interview went on, I began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. There was something not right about this woman, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. But then she said something that sent chills down my spine. She told me that if I wanted the job, I would have to go through a trial period where I would be asked to do tasks that were not related to the job at all. I didn't know what to say. I had never heard of anything like this before, and it seemed like a red flag. But I was so desperate for a job that I didn't want to walk away without at least giving it a chance. So I agreed to the trial period, not knowing what it would entail or what I was getting myself into. But I soon found out that it was much more than I could have ever imagined. The trial period started the next day, and I was told to come to the same office building. When I arrived, the woman who had interviewed me was nowhere to be found. Instead, I was greeted by a man who introduced himself as the supervisor. He was friendly enough, but there was something off about him, too. He seemed to be constantly watching me, as if he was waiting for me to slip up. The first task he gave me was simple enough. He asked me to make copies of some documents. But as the day went on, the tasks became increasingly bizarre. He asked me to sort a pile of buttons by color and then to arrange them into patterns. He asked me to make a list of all the songs I knew by heart and then to sing them for him. He even asked me to take a personality test, which seemed more like a quiz from a teen magazine than a legitimate test. I started to feel uneasy. What did any of these tasks have to do with marketing? And why was I being asked to do them? But I soldiered on, determined to make it through the trial period and get the job. I told myself that maybe these tasks were just a way to test my attention to detail or my creativity. But as the days went on, things got even weirder. The supervisor started to make strange comments, like how good I looked in my skirt or how he could tell I was a fun person. I tried to ignore him, but his comments made me increasingly uncomfortable. And then things took a really dark turn. One day, he asked me to come into his office and sit down. He told me that he had a special task for me, one that was very important for the company. But before he could explain what it was, he leaned in and kissed me on the lips. I was shocked and horrified. I tried to pull away, but he held me there, kissing me harder and harder. Finally, I managed to break free and run out of the office. I never went back, and I never heard from the company again. It was a terrifying experience, one that left me feeling violated and vulnerable. But it was also a lesson, a reminder that not everything on Craigslist is what it seems, and that we need to be cautious when dealing with strangers online. The experience with the shady Craigslist job interview and the disturbing trial period had left me feeling scared and disillusioned. I didn't know who to trust anymore, and I was starting to lose hope in finding a job. But with the help of my family and friends, I slowly started to pick myself up and move forward. I reported the incident to the police, and they were able to track down the company and the supervisor. It turned out that they had been running a human trafficking ring under the guise of a marketing company. They had been using Craigslist to lure unsuspecting victims, just like me, into their trap. I was lucky to have escaped, but I knew that there were countless others who had not been so fortunate. It broke my heart to think of all the people who had fallen prey to their schemes. But instead of letting the experience defeat me, I decided to use it as fuel for change. I started to volunteer at organizations that help victims of human trafficking and other online scams. I also started to speak out about my experience, sharing my story with others and raising awareness about the dangers of Craigslist and other online platforms. It wasn't easy. There were times when I felt scared and alone, when I wondered if I was making a difference at all. But then I would receive messages from people who had read my story and had been inspired to be more cautious, to be more aware of the dangers that were out there. And that's when I knew that I was making a difference. Even if it was just one person at a time, even if it was just a small ripple in a big pond, I was making a difference. In the end, the experience had changed me in ways that I could never have imagined. It had shown me the worst of humanity, but it had also shown me the best, the compassion and strength of those who were fighting to make a difference. And it had taught me a valuable lesson that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. There is always a way forward, even if it's not the path we had planned. We just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time, and never give up. I had just graduated from college and was looking for a cheap place to live while I figured out my next steps. That's when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a room in a shared apartment. The ad seemed perfect, the rent was cheap, the location was great, and the person who posted the ad seemed friendly and outgoing. We exchanged a few messages, and I decided to go see the apartment in person. When I arrived, I was greeted by the person who posted the ad, a woman in her late 20s with long, dark hair and a warm smile. She showed me around the apartment, and I was impressed by how clean and organized everything was. We talked for a while, and I felt like we had a lot in common. She seemed like a great roommate, and I was excited at the prospect of living with her. So I agreed to move in. We signed a lease, and I moved my things into the apartment a few days later. The first few weeks were great. My roommate and I got along well, and we spent our evenings watching movies and cooking dinner together. But then things started to take a strange turn. My roommate would disappear for hours at a time, sometimes without any explanation. She would come back late at night, looking disheveled and tired. I started to feel uneasy. I didn't know where she was going or who she was spending time with. And then one day, I came home early from work to find her in the living room with a strange man. He was older, with greasy hair and a scruffy beard. He seemed agitated, and I could tell that something was off about him. My roommate introduced him as a friend, but I could tell that she was nervous around him. I tried to be polite, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. As the weeks went on, things only got worse. The strange man started showing up more and more often, and I started to feel like I was living in a dangerous situation. I tried to talk to my roommate about it, but she brushed me off. She said that he was just a friend and that I was overreacting. But then one night, I came home to find my roommate and the strange man arguing in the living room. They were shouting at each other, and I could tell that things were about to turn violent. I tried to intervene, but the man pushed me aside and grabbed my roommate by the arm. He started dragging her toward the door, and I knew that I had to do something. I called the police, and they arrived just in time to stop the man from taking my roommate away. It turned out that he was a dangerous criminal who had been using my roommate as a pawn in his schemes. I was shaken, but I was also grateful. Grateful that I had trusted my instincts and called for help. Grateful that I had gotten my roommate out of a dangerous situation. But I was also terrified. I realized that I had no idea who my roommate really was and that I had put myself in a dangerous situation by living with her. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that not everything on Craigslist is what it seems, and that we need to be cautious when dealing with strangers online. After the incident with the strange man, I knew that I couldn't continue living with my roommate. It was just too dangerous, and I didn't want to put myself in harm's way. But I also knew that I couldn't just walk away without finding out more about my roommate's past. I needed to know who she really was and what she had been involved in. So I started to do some digging. I looked up her name online and found some disturbing information. She had a criminal record, including charges for fraud and theft. She had also been involved with a known gang in the past. I was shocked. I had no idea that my roommate had such a shady past. It made sense, though, the disappearing acts, the strange man, the sense of danger that had been hanging over us since I moved in. But I needed to know more. I started to ask around, talking to people who had known my roommate in the past. I found out that she had a history of getting involved with dangerous men and that she had a pattern of putting herself in risky situations. I also found out that she had been involved in some shady deals, including one involving fake IDs and passports. It seemed like she was involved in some kind of criminal activity, and I didn't want to be caught up in it. But as I dug deeper, I started to receive threats. Someone had found out that I was asking questions, and they didn't want me to find out any more information. I was scared, but I didn't want to give up. I knew that I needed to get to the bottom of things, no matter what the cost. That's when I received a call from the police. They had been investigating my roommate, too, and they had found out some disturbing information. It turned out that she had been involved in a major criminal organization, one that was involved in drugs, weapons, and human trafficking. She had been using Craigslist to recruit unsuspecting victims, just like me, into their web of lies. The police asked me to testify against her to help them bring her to justice. I was scared, but I knew that it was the right thing to do. So I testified in court, and my roommate was convicted of multiple charges. She was sentenced to prison, and I never saw her again. It was a terrifying experience, one that had left me shaken and scared. But it was also a lesson, a reminder that we need to be cautious when dealing with strangers online, and that we never know who we might be living with. I moved on from the experience, but I never forgot it. It had changed me in ways that I could never have imagined, and it had taught me to trust my instincts and be cautious when dealing with strangers. After the incident with my dangerous roommate, I felt like my world had been turned upside down. I had trusted someone who had turned out to be a criminal, and I had put myself in danger by living with her. But I also felt grateful that I had gotten out of the situation alive, and grateful that I had been able to help the police bring her to justice. In the weeks and months that followed, I focused on moving on. I found a new apartment, one that was in a safer neighborhood and with roommates who were trustworthy and kind. I also started to focus on my career, applying for jobs and going on interviews. It wasn't easy, but I knew that I had to keep moving forward and not let the experience define me. And then, one day, I received an unexpected message on LinkedIn. It was from a woman who had read about my experience with my dangerous roommate online. She told me that she had gone through a similar experience and that reading about my story had helped her feel less alone. We started talking, and we realized that we had a lot in common. We had both been lured into dangerous situations by people we had met online, and we had both managed to get out alive. We decided to start a support group, a place where people could come together to share their stories and find solace in each other's experiences. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. The support group grew, and we helped countless people who had been through similar experiences. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. There is always a way forward, even if it's not the path we had planned. We just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time, and never give up. And for me, that meant using my experience to help others. It meant turning a negative into a positive and using my story to make a difference in the world. I was desperate for a job. I had been unemployed for months, and my savings were running low. That's when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a marketing position. The ad promised good pay and flexible hours, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity. So I sent in my resume and waited for a response. A few days later, I received an email inviting me to an interview. I was thrilled. Finally, a chance to prove myself and get back on my feet. The interview was set to take place at a small office building in the downtown area. When I arrived, I was greeted by a woman who introduced herself as the supervisor. She was friendly and outgoing, and we hit it off right away. The interview went well, and I felt like I had made a good impression. The supervisor told me that I had a lot of potential and that she would like to offer me a trial period to see if I was a good fit for the company. I was over the moon. Finally, a chance to prove myself and start making money again. But then things started to take a strange turn. The supervisor started asking me to do things that seemed odd, like making cold calls at strange hours of the night or going to strange locations to drop off packages. I tried to ask her about it, but she brushed me off. She said that it was all part of the job and that I needed to be flexible and willing to take on any task. But then one day, I received a package to deliver to a sketchy-looking motel on the outskirts of town. I started to feel uneasy. This was not what I had signed up for, but I didn't want to disappoint the supervisor, so I went to the motel and dropped off the package, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. As I was leaving the motel, I was grabbed by two men and dragged into a nearby alley. They demanded to know what was in the package, and when I told them that I didn't know, they started to get violent. I managed to fight them off and run away, but I knew that something was not right. I didn't know who to trust anymore, and I started to feel like I had gotten in over my head. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that not everything on Craigslist is what it seems, and that we need to be cautious when dealing with strangers online. After the incident at the motel, I knew that I couldn't continue working for the company. It was just too dangerous, and I didn't want to put myself in harm's way. But I also knew that I couldn't just walk away without finding out more about the company and what they were involved in. I needed to know who they really were and what they had been doing, so I started to do some digging. I looked up the company name online and found some disturbing information. There were multiple reports of fraud and illegal activity associated with the company. I also found out that the supervisor had been using Craigslist to recruit unsuspecting victims into their web of lies. They would offer them jobs that seemed too good to be true and then use them as pawns in their schemes. I was shocked. I had no idea that the company had such a shady past. It made sense, though, the odd tasks, the strange hours, the sense of danger that had been hanging over us since the beginning. But I needed to know more. I started to ask around, talking to people who had worked for the company in the past. I found out that they had been involved in some shady deals, including one involving fake IDs and passports. It seemed like they were involved in some kind of criminal activity, and I didn't want to be caught up in it. But as I dug deeper, I started to receive threats. Someone had found out that I was asking questions, and they didn't want me to find out any more information. I was scared, but I didn't want to give up. I knew that I needed to get to the bottom of things, no matter what the cost. That's when I received a call from the police. They had been investigating the company, too, and they had found out some disturbing information. It turned out that the company was a front for a major criminal organization, one that was involved in drugs, weapons, and human trafficking. They had been using Craigslist to recruit unsuspecting victims, just like me, into their web of lies. The police asked me to testify against them, to help them bring the organization to justice. I was scared, but I knew that it was the right thing to do. So I testified in court, and the organization was dismantled. Many of its members were arrested, and the supervisor was sentenced to prison. It was a terrifying experience, one that had left me shaken and scared. But it was also a lesson, a reminder that we need to be cautious when dealing with strangers online, and that we never know who we might be working for. I moved on from the experience, but I never forgot it. It had changed me in ways that I could never have imagined, and it had taught me to trust my instincts and be cautious when dealing with strangers. After the incident with the criminal organization, I felt like my world had been turned upside down once again. I had trusted someone who had turned out to be a criminal, and I had put myself in danger by working for them. But I also felt grateful that I had gotten out of the situation alive, and grateful that I had been able to help the police bring them to justice. In the weeks and months that followed, I focused on moving on. I started to apply for jobs again, but this time I was more cautious. I made sure to do my research on every company before applying, and I made sure to trust my instincts. I also started to focus on my personal life. I had neglected my friends and family while I was working for the criminal organization, and I wanted to make it up to them. So I started to reach out to old friends, reconnecting and rebuilding the relationships that I had let slip away. It wasn't easy, but I knew that I had to keep moving forward and not let the experience define me. And then, one day, I received an unexpected call from the police. They wanted to thank me for my help in the investigation, and they wanted to offer me a job. It was a job as an advocate for victims of online crime, a way for me to use my experience to help others who had been through similar situations. I was overjoyed. Finally, a chance to turn a negative into a positive and to use my story to make a difference in the world. So I took the job, and I started to work with victims of online crime. It wasn't easy. Many of the stories were heartbreaking and terrifying, but it was worth it. I was able to help people who had been through similar situations, to provide them with support and guidance, and to help them find a way forward. Thank you for watching these true Craigslist horror stories. We hope that these stories have served as a reminder to always be cautious when dealing with strangers online. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel for more true horror stories. And don't forget to hit that bell icon so that you never miss an upload. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.